Let's talk about sandbags. Now, first off, what are sandbags filled with? Does anybody know? Yes. Close. It's actually sand. But what are these guys used for? Well, sandbags are used to help stabilize your equipment, such as light stands, tripods, or C-stands. They help add weight to your equipment to help avoid them from tipping or falling over.
Ooh, I missed it. I didn't get it in time. I wasn't fast enough.
One of the most common uses for sandbags are light stands because, as we all know, light stands are pretty light. And when you're adding a heavy light on top of it and you're putting it up 6, 8, 10, 15 feet in the air, it's going to be very top heavy. And that's very easy for somebody to walk into, trip over, and accidentally knock the light over, which could break the light or could even hurt somebody. And so by adding that sandbag to the base of it, it's going to help make the base heavier, and that way it counterbalances it and makes it a lot more sturdy. So if somebody bounces into it, or if you're filming outside and it's a windy day, it's going to help avoid that light being knocked over. And on that point, like I said, if you're filming outside can be very windy, unlike inside, which is usually not very windy. And so with having winds, depending how heavy your winds are, what's going on, it's easy for a light to be knocked over, especially if it's higher up and if it's a lighter light or if it's very top heavy. So using sandbags are going to be able to help stabilize everything and keep it secure. My last video talked about the differences between cheaper and more expensive tripods and about how cheaper tripods are easier to knock over, shake when you're filming, and so you can actually use a sandbag for when you're filming with a tripod. It's going to help stabilize that shaky movement, whether you're outside or if you're on a bench or bleachers or one of those risers if you're filming speakers, and you can have those natural shakes. If somebody steps on, steps off, if you move around, it will help kind of stabilize and smooth that out. Now, traditionally with this, you'll be able to put it in the middle of your tripod where the bars all connect, but you also want to be careful because if you're using a cheaper tripod, there's a chance that it could break on the weight, depending how heavy your sandbag is. So just be cautious of what kind of tripod you're using and how much weight it can hold. So always start with less and then slowly add on more because you don't want to add on 20 pounds and it breaks and you're like, well, now I don't have a tripod, so this is going to be awkward. For light stands, depending on what light you're using, a 5-10 pound bag could be perfect, or if it's a heavier setup, you may need up to 15 to even 20 pounds, or even multiple bags, depending on how much equipment you're adding on. So I like to use sandbags with dual compartments. That way it's easy to drape over light stands, C-stands, tripods, and it just makes it easier opposed to trying to make it fit correctly and then it falling over. Most likely this is going to stay easily on your equipment. So to use a sandbag effectively, you're going to drape it on the opposite side of your weight. So if you're using a C-stand with a light or anything extending out, you'll want to put it on the opposite side so that way it helps counterbalance it opposed to setting it forward. As well with the light stand, you'll want to drape it over the bars to make sure it's secure on there holding it down. And like I mentioned earlier with a tripod, you'll want to put it on the middle bars holding it up, but be aware of how much weight your tripod can hold. There's actually also some tripods that do have hooks for sandbags that are created for that specific reason as well. Now they do have water bags that you could use instead of sandbags, and they could be sometimes a lighter option, but they're a risky option, at least in my mind, because if that breaks somehow, you're going to have water all over the place, and you don't really want that when you're using it for light, so just keep that in mind. But also, sandbags can tear themselves, and as you know, when you go to the beach, sand tends to get everywhere. So they do have sandbags that are double zips, that way then it minimizes the idea of them breaking and zipping apart. Something else I've seen people talk about doing is to put the sand in like a 5-gallon bag and then put it in there so that way it just is extra protection just in case so it doesn't spill out. Now, something you want to just keep in mind is to make sure that your sandbags are up to use, not spilling, because you don't want to go on location, film, and leave, and all of a sudden you leave a trail of sand, because I don't think anybody appreciates that. Now, I briefly mentioned about C-stands, and if you have something extending out, whether it's a flag or a light, a camera, etc. Now, there are some C-stands that do have that extender bar that has a weight on the end of it that can be like 2, maybe 3 pounds, but that may not be heavy enough for you. It does help, but it may not be enough for what you're using. So something that might be good to do is to add a sandbag to that. Now, when you add it just to the C-stand itself, that's going to help, but the biggest thing is that bar with that weight, if it's so far out, it could help. If it's so far out, it could gradually start to bend down or maybe not hold up exactly how you want it to do. But by using a sandbag up on the bar itself, it's going to help counterweight that bar and it's going to hold it up nice and steady. So that might be another thing to keep in mind. Now they do have hooks that you can use to clip onto your light stands to then put a sandbag right on top of it. So that way it has a nice little hook. So just another thing to keep in mind. Sandbags can be an overlooked tool. It's something I overlooked for years and years, but it's actually very helpful for when you're filming in big situations because you don't want light stands to be knocked over. You don't want to fall and potentially hurt somebody, especially if you're on a shoot using a location maybe that you're renting, or you potentially hurt a client or just somebody walking by. So using a sandbag is going to be a very, very helpful tool. But if you don't even need it to hold your light stands, you can always use it for some massive curls and gains. I lift weights. So if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Unless you don't watch next time. But please do. All right, okay. We can cut it now. No need to keep this going. It's just extend the runtime, and it's going to downgrade because nobody's going to watch this to the end. And except for maybe my wife or myself, I'll watch the end. But I usually don't comment on my videos because I feel like people know my name, Corey. And it would be weird if I was like, wow, such a funny video. And they're like, this is this guy. So, all right, just cut it. Cut it. All right. I like that. I think that'll be funny. And now I'll actually end it right there.